What will Australia look like in 40 years' time? Treasurer Jim Chalmers handed down the latest Intergenerational Report a short while ago, and this 5-yearly report from the federal government predicts what the country is going to look like in 40 years' time and the state of the nation's finances over that time. So to find out what it says about our future and whether we should even believe it, today I'm joined by leading demographer Simon Kuestenmacher. So whether you're a property investor keen to know what the future holds so that you can make the right investment decisions, or whether you're a business owner or just an employee, wouldn't it be nice to know what's ahead for our country? Well, my chat with Simon promises to offer you some valuable insights and some smart analysis. So let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
A bunch of economists and others have put their collective heads together and given us the latest Intergenerational Report, which looks at where Australia is going to be in 40 years' time in 2063. And surprise, surprise, it's not all good news. To help understand what our future has in store for us, I'm looking forward to my chat with demographer Simon Kuestenmacher, who's of course a co-founder of the Demographic Group. Now, you probably know Simon because he's a regular on this show and he writes regular columns in the New Daily and in The Australian. And in general, his media commentary and his public speaking focuses on current socio-demographic trends and how these impact Australia. So he's the right person to ask about what Australia is going to look like. Hi, Simon.
Good to be back.
Now, Simon, the Intergenerational Report tells us the Australia of the 2060s is going to be very different from the one we know about today. It's going to be an older Australia, slower economic growth. We're going to have a big care economy, an export sector that's going to be very different, probably partly due to climate change. So let me start with an obvious question. What is the Intergenerational Report? And let's be blunt, how useful is it really?
Yeah, so I have to admit that I'm a bit of a fan of the Intergenerational
I thought you'd like
Report.
it. That and the census must really turn you on.
Yeah, exactly. The census is better. The census is the gold standard of Australian data collection. But the Intergenerational Report is a great exercise. And it is essentially a easy-to-read 300-page monster of a report that is published by the Treasury. And the idea is that it forces the government to look 40 years into the future. So that is essentially meant to take politicians out of the short-term election cycle style thinking, but to really think what are the very predictable, big fat challenges on the horizon. And from a population perspective, it is a story of a bigger Australia. So we are very confident that in the next 40 years, we will have an Australian at around 41 million people. So we add another 15 million people or thereabouts. And that then, of course, is a good excuse to talk strategically about what Australia should look like. Well, where are we putting those 15 million new people? Are we proportionately put them into Sydney and Dubbo and Newcastle in the same way that we put population now? Or should we say, well, maybe our big cities kind of reached a level where we have a couple of issues, where we potentially should say we should grow our smaller cities at faster rates than our big cities forever onwards. These are the discussions that we have. And big picture infrastructure discussions can be held based on these long-term projections as well.
Well, they really are just forecasts, aren't they? And they change. This time around, it actually wasn't 4 years in between the intergenerational reports, but just comparing one to the other, many of the projections have changed, but some, I think, in general have remained the same. We're going to have a much bigger population, but a much older population. We're going to live longer. We're going to spend more time in full health. And migration, according to this report, is going to contribute to a lot of the population growth, isn't it?
Exactly. So with migration, we always want to remember that the vast majority, well over 80% of migrants are 18 to 39. this very narrow age bracket. So that means that the aging of the population that we're predicting 40 years into the future, these numbers will be exactly correct because all those people are already in the country.
I guess so, yeah.
So there's no discussion there. And we then understand, well, if we grow by at that very strong rate, we of course need to increase the migrant pool. So I don't see any government that is plausible to be in power in the next 10, 20 years that would even consider a lower migration approach. That seems ridiculous.
So that's just going to create issues, as we've discussed before, and I hope to have a bit of a chat about now. But migration is a given. That's correct.
Yes.
Also, we're going to be living longer, and I guess that means there's going to be a lot of older people over the next 40 years. Life expectancy is going to be maybe 85 and a half years for men, and women are going to live even longer than that. I think that's one of the issues, isn't it? There's going to be lots more people over 65, and the number of people 85 and over is going to triple, and they're the ones that are going to need care.
Exactly. And that's when you just see that we do need so much human labor to look after this tripling cohort that needs aged care. And these workers will almost exclusively be migrants because they are low-income jobs. And Australians are, in a sense, overeducated for those jobs. We have well over half of a high school graduation year heading to university. There are just not enough workers that could then jump into a low-paying aged care job. We will import those people from overseas. We then need to house those people. We do know that the aging cohorts of now and in 40 years' time, so in 40 years' time, millennials will be the old ones that need care.
Aha! It's going to be your turn.
It is hitting me as well. But so that means those people, they will not want to have the old-fashioned aged care model. They will want to live independently for as long as possible. So that means all the care workers need to be co-located with the people that need care. So that means all those middle suburbs that NIMBYed the living hell out of their local area, they will need to find some sort of way of getting housing close by, low-income housing. So Australia will look a bit different in the coming decades as we change the urban structure.
Well, that's going to give quite a few property implications. It's also going to give some budgetary implications for the government to support the ageing population. They're going to need more health services. Many are going to be on the pension, remembering that many baby boomers don't have a very big superannuation because the system wasn't around from when they first started working. And that's another reason why we're going to need more workers just to pay the taxes. But if you look at it from the property side, it suggests that we may have to build 6.6 million new homes over the coming 40 years, just to account for the population growth. But the need for the ageing residents is going to, I guess the sort of homes we're going to want to stay in will be different, Simon, to maybe the houses that we want now. And just like generations before me went into retirement villages, my generation of baby boomers, we don't want to go into retirement villages or retirement homes.
That's right. And the built environment can play a big part here. So if we're building houses that can easily serve you throughout your whole life cycle, you ensure that people can age in place. So we're talking about wider doors that eventually a wheelchair can come in. A house, even if you don't have a lift in the house now, if you have 2 stories, that you have a plan in mind where you could plonk in a lift once you reach your mid 70s or 80s. All these things are going a long way. Bathrooms that you can still access when you are mobility limited. All those things are absolutely crucial. And I always implore people to think about those issues when they are planning for their homes right now. This is particularly true for your own house that you live in. Of course, for investment properties, you open up the range of tenants that you could get once it is accessible and age appropriate.
Well, yes, people are going to want to be right-sizing or downsizing. Now, we know that the government recently had a big talk fest and said they're going to build, well, it's now 1.2 million homes. No, they're not going to build 1.2 million homes. They're going to give incentives to do that, but the government's not going to lay the bricks and the mortar. And so the levels of building that they're talking about are probably not going to be a building boom. They're in very many ways going to be just the new normal of home building requirements? Because we're already starting with a shortfall, Simon.
So we are starting with a shortfall. I woke up today in an optimistic mood. So I'll give you the positive spin. Is I now see for the very first time, and I've been in Australia for 16 years now, is a shift in the way that politicians talk about housing. There seems to be a real, honest interest in massively amping up supply. That is much needed. We're also seeing right now, and that will continue into the future, we're seeing the power grab from state governments that are taking power away from local governments. Local governments in Australia have an awful lot of power to block, to veto developments. This power will be bit by bit snatched away by the states. The positive impact here is that you can, as a state, you can set housing targets for a local government area. That means we will see more densification. We'll see more housing stock being built in all local areas. That is the positive aspect. The risk is always that we overcorrect. Overcorrection in that sense means that we lose local intelligence in building. So in an ideal scenario, you have those three layers of government, federal, state, and local, to have different levels of intelligence, because the state can't know the ins and outs of how your suburb works. That'd be ridiculous. But so now that the state takes those planning powers or the vetoing powers away, we might build more nonsensical buildings, more nonsensical structures. That's the risk. But overall, I think it's a very helpful development because we are amping up supply.
So there's clearly going to be population changes and property changes related to that. What about the economy? The suggestion I read was that the economy is going to be 2.5 times larger. Incomes will be 50% higher. But like other advanced economies, we're probably not going to grow as much over the next 40 years as we have in the last couple of decades, Simon.
Yes. And part of this is one little chart in the intergenerational report that I really enjoyed. It is the very humble productivity growth that's in there. So the report suggests that we grow worker productivity by 1.2% per year. That is not all that much. This is just a number that doesn't say much. In the 90s, it was well over 2%. So we should really, because these are just forecasts.
So if I'm not mistaken, Simon, to get better wages proportionately after inflation, we've got to be more productive, don't we?
Yes, absolutely. So every single worker bee needs to create more economic output. Every now and then you have a sector like mining where every now and then productivity doubles. That's not because the individual worker in the mine drives the truck faster or drills faster. No, it is because the prices for mining products double on the global stage. But if you think about the majority of workers who are operating in the healthcare sector, in professional services, tradies, those people can be a bit more productive if they work more, if they have better tools. Knowledge workers, with the help of AI, they can produce maps and charts and reports faster. That frees them up to do more work or to do other value-added work. So this is where technology really helps us, which is why I always massively implore all businesses in Australia to fully embrace innovation and technology. That includes warehouses where, they should be more automated and so forth, because we need to squeeze out more productivity without working workers to death. One way, of course, to create productivity is just to work your existing workforce to death, but you can't do that in the continued environment of a skills shortage. We're running out of workers. We're not running out of jobs. So you need to treat your workers really well as an economy, but still make them more productive. And the only way you can do this is to give them better tools, to make them more efficient in their output.
Now, when you talk about the economy, the government's currently making money out of taxes, the excise tax on petrol, on smoking. I don't smoke, but somebody recently told me how much a packet of cigarettes cost. A huge amount of tax. I guess there's tax on alcohol as well. I guess moving forward, there's probably still going to be a lot of alcohol consumed, but I think petrol's not going to be consumed anywhere near as much. All the excise costs they're getting on that, and probably smoking rates are going to decrease. So the government's going to have to find other sources of revenue, Simon.
Very much so. And we are every now and then reaching this, at the moment, it's a utopian discussion of how do we tax the work effort of machines, of robots, of algorithms?
Oh, never thought about
How do
that.
we capture the profit? So my general argument is that the next couple of decades in Australia will be dominated by a prolonged mining boom. And the hilarious thing about this mining boom is that it will be happening under completely different public perception. At the moment, mining is dirty, evil, polluting the planet. In the very near future, mining will be a green technology because it is powering the electrification of the global transport network. A combustion engine needs a bit of oil. You get this from one Gulf state. But to get the batteries that run an electric transport network, you need nine essential mining products in a battery? Oh, that's a bit difficult because those mining products are all over the shop, globally speaking. But very few of those mining resources are in stable democracies. We are one of those very special places in Australia. That means not only do we get high prices for it, but people will prefer our mining products over other mining products simply because we can essentially guarantee supply chain sovereignty. We can guarantee a stable supply of our products. And that's wonderful. So that then raises the question, how are we going to capture this new mining wealth? I would suggest we go down the route of Singapore, of Norway, where you build, of Saudi Arabia, where we build a sovereign wealth fund, a national sovereign wealth fund to better capture all of this wealth to then utilize it exclusively on nation building projects. We're not doing this. At the moment, mining wealth isn't spreading well enough across the whole population. It is not creating prolonged wealth in this country. And ever the optimist, I'm hoping that we find mechanisms of capturing this wealth in a more equitable way.
I'm glad you're an optimist. Optimists do much, much better than pessimists in this world. So that's good. I think it's important to understand the challenges we're going to be having and then find a positive way around them. I guess one of the other challenges moving forward is going to be climate change. That's going to affect, it's going to have profound effects on our economy, but also on our society. I guess it's going to affect where we choose to live, how we're getting our energy sources, as we say. Is the government actually taking enough action about this? There's a lot of news in the media about that.
Yeah, it's a lot of talk about it. So in climate change, what you need to, from an Australian perspective, what this means in a practical sense, it is hotter weather. For most people, it's just a bit more comfortable or uncomfortable, depending on where they live in Australia. Yes. But so that doesn't matter much. What matters is how does that impact agriculture more than anything? Because we are a net exporter of agricultural good. We make money that way. We help feed the planet that way. That is crucial. An increase of extreme weather events will mean more and more harvests will be flooded out, will be burned. There will not be enough water. So water management becomes absolutely crucial looking forward. From a housing perspective, of course, global warming means you need to build boxes that are adequate. If I'm looking at Western Sydney, for example, there are plenty of poorly insulated homes built, wall to wall, no green space. These boxes heat up like crazy in the summer. They're impossible to heat in wintertime. And this is where we're putting our poor people in. So there is a social justice element in there, essentially. We say, it's cool. We put all the poor people on the outskirts of town. We let them sizzle away. That's not the Australian way.
No.
That is not the fair, just way. So we do need to build appropriate, climate-appropriate housing. And are we doing this? Probably not. We need to be more forward-looking. And that is, of course, easier said than done, because building a cheap box on a block of land, that is one way of keeping housing costs somewhat manageable. If we have stronger standards, the house, at least initially, in the long run not, but initially it is more expensive. And that creates problem in its own right.
Yes. I guess in the short term, it's hard to justify some of those costs. I think as we're looking forward to Australia as well, we're going to have more a service-based economy, probably not going to be able to cope with manufacturing. That's already been happening anyway, but the trend's going to continue on.
Exactly. So we are becoming more and more educated, and the jobs, a service economy job, of course, means people do stuff for other people rather than to produce material or agricultural output. That way that trend is all but guaranteed. And these types of jobs, of course, dictate that they tend to be located in cities rather than in regional areas. So we see a continued trend towards jobs being clustered in big or bigger cities, in agglomeration areas. So, well, what does that mean? That means people will live close by. So we'll probably not see the absolute population boom in the inland. We'll see it along the whole coast, and we'll probably see more cities pop up along the coast. And looking forward 40 years, we already have a fast rail authority, but at the moment, building a fast rail line across the eastern seaboard, that is a bit silly. It's financial suicide. But at some point, if we grow another 15 million people, and most of them will be living somewhere across the East Coast, this rail network becomes a necessity. It's just a matter of timing. When are we building this? Because building infrastructure now is always cheaper than building it into the future, because in the future you need to build through more expensive, more developed land. That's one of those very, very difficult major infrastructure discussions that the report at least helps you think about and helps you time.
Now, people are going to be listening to this and wondering, can we support this much bigger economy? And I remember you mentioning at your talk at Wealth Retreat that Australia is well positioned to keep growing wealth-wise and keep growing our economy because of where we are geographically and how, in general, we make our money, Simon.
Exactly. Our basic, simple business model that Australia operates under will be fine in the coming decades. Remember, on the global stage, we do 4 things to make money. We export mining goods, we export agricultural goods, we entertain a couple of people, tourism, and we educate a couple of people, international education. These things will all be in super high demand. Mining costs will be very high, or mining products will get high prices.
Yeah.
No problem there. We got plenty of stuff. Agricultural costs will be very high. That is terrible news for the bottom 2 billion people in the planet. But for any food exporter, Australia, that is great news. The demand for education, international English-speaking education, that will be nice and high, simply because the Asian middle class continues to grow. Yes, China is shrinking its population base, but the Chinese middle class will continue to grow. So is the Indian middle class.
It's not just China, of course, is it? So even though they're having their problems,
it's a whole continent that we are benefiting from there, and tourism as well, because these new middle class people, they are tourists. You're not an international traveling tourist if you are in the lower income brackets.
Yep.
But once you reach the middle class, you become an international tourist. All these trends work in our way. Plus, in 2032, we have the Olympics in Australia, in Brisbane, and that creates another boost of awareness that is usually associated with another tourism boom. The general economic outlook for Australia, I would say, is bright. We offer political stability, and we just mentioned climate change. What climate change is doing on a global basis, more than anything, it is leading to human movement. An increased number of people will be moving from A to B because their area becomes economically unviable. If it's agriculture, they become unlivable because it's hot. So there's a lot of forced migration, so to speak, happening, and Europe will struggle with this. But Australia, all of a sudden, the tyranny of distance that Jeffrey Blaney talked about in the 60s, that's not a thing anymore. All of a sudden, it is a very helpful mode. We have the easiest to manage borders in the world as a big island nation. We are not negatively impacted by that. Our economy, I would argue, will be fine.
There will be problems with the economy, though. There has been talk about the deficit that's going to continue on. It's going to blow out the burden that aged care outlays and debt repayment are going to have. But the government seems to be able to cope with debt. I guess it can always print a bit more money. I'm not sure that what that's going to do, create more inflation. Are you worried about this ongoing the concern of budget deficits in the foreseeable future?
Not so much, because that seems to be ironed out. And so this is, of course, when you discuss modern monetary theory and so forth. But the idea is that I'm comparing Australia in the international broader picture. And lots of countries have profiles and issues that are much, much worse. So I'm very much looking at Australia in a relative sense in the challenges that we have. And we can grow our way out of this if we really go all in with mining. And we then have a way of actually capturing this wealth, benefiting the total Australian population, I see no reason why we couldn't continue to grow. If we are really doubling down on new population growth, new urban growth, we can get jobs and businesses from overseas, because some businesses will need to resettle to more stable places. The idea of big movements through climate change, all of this suggests political instability. If we remain a politically stable, strong democracy, we can grow as much as we want, if you will. From a population perspective, we can attract businesses. That should all be positive. There are plenty of opportunities there. Yes, all of those risks are real. And this is why we counter them as much as we can. When we talked about the budget deficits and so forth, we're countering them by amping up migration. In a sense, this is a bit of a short-term measure, but you do this for as long as you can upgrade the economy. Some people say, we don't need to grow migrants because Japan, they didn't get migrants in. But Japan is a completely different business model than Australia. Japan makes their money through Japanese companies who produce stuff and sell stuff overseas and then get the profits back into the country. In Australia, everything that we do to make money is done in-house by people that live in the country. So we do need the human population base much more than Japan does.
Well, I guess looking at all this then, the Intergenerational Report isn't really a waste of time and money. It gets us thinking about what might happen and what we should prepare for. I think it also stimulates others to think outside the square, like you're saying, because there are going to be challenges, there are going to be problems, but let's turn them into positives. Rather than worrying about the day-to-day things, I think what you're showing us is that the future is bright, and a lot of the things we worried about a couple of years ago just haven't happened. Life goes on. Simon, if people want to keep in contact with you, I know one of the best ways is you've got a huge following on, well, I was going to say Twitter, but it's not called Twitter anymore, is it? It's called X. And so you put things on every day. You're in the New Daily every Sunday, and that's not behind a paywall, and regularly in the Australian, which is behind a paywall. But I'll leave a link to those in the show notes anyway, so people can keep in contact with your thinking. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.
Fantastic. Very much looking forward to it as well.
Thanks, Simon. I hope you got some benefit from my chat with Simon. And if you did, and you don't currently follow or subscribe to this podcast, before we get on to the next section, my mindset message, please just stop and whatever podcast app you're on, follow it, this podcast, of course, so that you can get twice a week information from my great guests like Simon, and he's on once a month. Now, in a moment, I'm going to share my mindset message with you. But you're probably listening to this podcast because you're interested in property. And if you're like many people, you're wondering, well, is it really a good time to even consider investing in property? Clearly, the worst is over. Clearly, the best is yet to come. We're at the beginning of a new property cycle. So in my mind, I don't know your personal circumstances, but it's worth considering. It's worth at least getting your ducks in a row and getting set for the opportunities that are going to abound. Hey, but be careful. Property investment's a process. It's not an event. So you can't just go out and buy any property and hope to be successful. In my mind, formulating a plan and getting the right advice is more critical now than ever, because in this new cycle, just like in every other cycle, 50% of people who get involved in property are going to sell up pretty quickly within the first years because they got it wrong. And those who get into the property market, most of them won't ever get past their first or second property. So why not have a chat with my team at Metropole? We don't have any properties for sale, but we offer strategic advice and will help you with direction, results and certainty. By the way, we're much more than just buyer's agents. We help our clients create intergenerational wealth by giving property and wealth advice. And yes, we're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. Metropole.com.au. I'd love to be part of your ongoing wealth creation journey.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In my mindset session today, I'd like to have a chat with you about why I believe optimists rule the world. Look, have you ever run into an optimist? Most who do walk away upbeat, energized and optimistic themselves. You know, you feel better just being in the presence of an optimist. Now contrast that to pessimists. being with a pessimist drags you down. It drags you down emotionally. They sap your energy. They infect you with their own pessimism, and you tend to feel worse just being in the presence of a pessimist. So people are attracted to optimists and repelled by pessimists. By a wide margin, the successful property investors I come across, in fact, I think almost all of them, were inherently optimistic. So why is it important? Why is it important to be optimistic? Why does it relate to success? Well, success doesn't happen on its own. When you're in business, or whether you're climbing up the corporate ladder, or whether you're wanting to be an investor or an entrepreneur, being an optimist is a huge advantage. Optimists are able to attract others around them to help their cause. You need to surround yourself with like-minded optimists who believe in your dreams and your goals and your cause. Optimists are like magnets, attracting other optimists, success-minded people to them. It makes it possible for them to move to their dreams, to their goals. Optimists have others helping them, working with them to overcome obstacles, to open doors, to clear the paths, to enable them to succeed in life. On the other hand, pessimists repulse people who could otherwise help them in life. As a result, they're often left to their own resources, unable to marshal support to their dreams, to their goals, to their initiatives. Pessimists are limited to one brain in helping them succeed in their own, on their life. They're on their own. But even worse, their pessimism turns people they come into contact with from apostles to adversaries. Pessimists alienate others. They alienate individuals that become an army of human obstacles, fighting them at every turn. Achieving success in life is hard. It is. Achieving success in investment is hard. Achieving success in business is hard. Optimism makes it less hard, while pessimism makes it harder. In fact, if not impossible. Gratitude's a great way to optimism. Envy is the gateway to pessimism. So if you're struggling with pessimism, start by expressing gratitude every day for things that you have, things that are going your way. You've probably heard me say it before. Every morning before I get out of bed, I think about 3 things I was grateful for that actually happened yesterday. Not that way I can't actually say the same things every morning. Wake up in the morning grateful. It starts the day off right. So if you're struggling, as I said, start your day by expressing, if you're struggling with pessimism, start your day by expressing gratitude. This is going to shift your mindset from negative to positive. Optimists succeed in life, while in general, pessimists fail. Now, both mindsets are a daily habit, so make optimism your daily habit, and you're going to attract the people you need to attract who are going to help you realize your dreams. They're going to help you achieve your goals. Optimists rule the world. Well, thanks for spending the last little while with me, and I hope you got some benefit from this show. If you did, and you know somebody else who'd also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there's 3 little buttons down the bottom. Press it and share it, or just tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you'll definitely be doing me a favour and helping me in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, there's ways of catching up with me between these shows. Just look for Michael Yardney on social media, or why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I have a way of saying thank you to you for subscribing to this podcast. Go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where you can get a bunch of ebooks and reports. My way of saying thank you. And when you've got time, why not listen to some of the old podcasts? There's individual lessons in each of those that I think would be helpful for you. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?